Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at WordPress custom post types. I'm going to teach you exactly what they are and why you would ever use them in your projects. And you're going to find they're really, really helpful. Along the way, I'm also going to teach you about that scary word taxonomies. What is a custom taxonomy, or what is a meta box, and how would you use those? Everything I'm going to cover step by step so that you can use these in your future projects. Let's get started. So let's take a quick example before we dig in. If we go to this site, popcritics.com, you can see here it's simply a movie database essentially, but it's built in WordPress. Now, if you were thinking of how you would build this, if you wanted to have a movie database, how would you want to filter the movies? For example, would you want to filter according to the actor? Maybe we want to see all movies that have Tom Hanks within them. We can do that in WordPress by using taxonomies. And an easy way to understand the term taxonomy is filter. If I wanted to filter my content, what sort of taxonomy would I want to use? In this case, they use an actor. What other options? Maybe director. Let's see what else. They have tags. There's lots of different ways to filter. We can see that they're also using genres as well. So if you were to think about how you would do this normally in WordPress without custom post types and taxonomies, it is possible using custom fields, but it sure would be a lot of work. And we can make things much, much cleaner if we take advantage of these newer features. So now, with that out of the way, let's get into it. And as always, we are starting absolutely from scratch. So what I have here is a brand new, fresh installation of WordPress. And if we open up our folder, you can see that I browsed to the default 2011 template, and this has not been touched at all. So the first thing is, whenever you're building plugins or extensions for WordPress, you always want to have debug mode turned on. And this is something a lot of developers don't know they can do. So you can do that by browsing to your WordPress directory and then scrolling down to the WP config file. And let's drag that into a code editor, and we're going to search for WP_debug. Now this is a constant that's set to false, but while you are in development mode, change it to true, and then you can just switch it back when you're finished. This way you'll get all of the notices that you need. Otherwise, it can be really difficult to debug your WordPress projects. All right, so I'm going to close that out, and now we're back to our theme directory. The first step is to go to functions.php. Now you can create custom post types by using the functions file, or you can install it as a plugin. It truthfully just depends on what your needs are. Here I want to keep it simple, so we're going to do it like so. Within functions.php, my first step is I don't want to put all of this code within here. I'm going to reference a different file. So we'll require it, and we'll call it my custom posts.php. Next, let's create that file. And again, make sure you save this within the root of your theme folder, or if you want to have a specialized folder, just make sure that you reference it properly. So the first step is to register a post type. Now you can see here we have two parameters. The first one is going to be, what is the name of the post type? And as you can see here, there are some built-in post types, such as post and page and attachment. So how would we want ours to be named? And it needs to be singular, and it should be lowercase. So in this case, we're going to build something similar to that movie database website, but let's do it something more coder-friendly. So maybe we'll build a snippet website where people can view snippets, and they can browse them according to perhaps difficulty, language, framework, things like that. So I'm going to call mine snippet. And the second parameter is going to be a list of arguments that define the features of the post type. So we can either reference an args array, or we can just pass it in like so. And that's what we'll do in this particular case. So let's do the bare minimum so we can at least see it show up within the WordPress dashboard. And the bare minimum is to set public to true. Now what this does is it actually defines three parameters. And those would include things like show the UI, show it in nav menus, things like that. I don't want to go over those too much because you're not quite there yet, but just know this essentially states that we want to be able to see and work with our snippet rather than having a behind the scenes post type, which might make sense in other situations. So now if I refresh the page, you can see that we do indeed have this new post type, but the label is all wrong. It says post, and that's because we really haven't provided a label for it. We've created a post type, but we haven't given it a label. So let's do that right now. And the label will be snippet. Now if I reload, you can see that this has changed to snippet. Good. So with very little code at all, we have added a new panel to the WordPress backend. Now, there's one problem with this is we are assuming that WordPress understands what register post type is, and depending upon the order of events that WordPress loads all of its files, it may or may not. So it's always a best practice to wrap it within, in this case, the init add action. Now, when you are adding add action, what we're saying here is when WordPress gets to the init level where it's loaded the core files, we can then execute the code within. And WordPress does that by a function called do action. Now, you might be used to a different syntax, which would be add action init, and then do something would be equal to a function that would register the post type. However, if you have the ability to use PHP 5.3 or higher, you can pass what we call an anonymous function instead. And I think this is much cleaner. The only thing is you need to be aware is if you are building your plugin or this custom post type for people using PHP 5.2 or lower, maybe if you're distributing a theme on ThemeForest or Code Canyon, you might want to use named functions instead. But for personal use, absolutely use this method. It's much cleaner. So I will save that, and if I reload, we're getting the same effect, but this is still a much better practice. Now, watch what happens when we add a new label. Notice it still says add new post, and that's because we haven't really defined any labels. And you don't have to if you don't want to. That's fine. You understand what it is. But if you do want to be more specific, you can pass labels parameter, which will be an array, and there's a huge number of options that you can set. And we're not going to go over all of them because many times they aren't needed. But just so you know, you can refer to the WordPress codex, and if you want to do things such as add new item, you could set that to add new snippet. And then if I save that and reload, you'll see that that updates. And you're going to have similar things for edit new snippet, add new, add item, lots of things so that you can define exactly what the text and the buttons should say. I'm going to leave it at that for now, and you can refer to the WordPress codex if you want to learn more. I don't want to overflow you with too much information to start. And next, we can define supports. And this means what features in this panel does it support? Does it support the title? Does it support the editor? Does it support comments? As you can see here, the default is title and editor, but we can always override that. So we can pass an array, and if I want only a title for some odd reason, reload, and now we're only displaying that. So why don't we say we want the title, the editor, maybe we want comments. If you want an excerpt, you could do that as well. Reload, looks good. If you need a thumbnail, we now have support for that, though do remember in your functions file, you need to enable support for thumbnails, and you can refer to NetTuts for how to do that. In this case, we're not going to use all of this, so we'll keep title, editor, comments, and let's keep it at that for now. That looks good to me. Now, other things we could use is, wouldn't it be nice when you're adding a new snippet to tag it? So if I have a CSS snippet, I could tag it CSS3 or border radius. And we shouldn't create a custom taxonomy to reproduce what is already available in WordPress, which is tags. So your instinct might be, if you're like me, would be to do something like tag or post tag within here. But it's not going to show up if I reload. And that's because post tag and category, those are built-in taxonomies. So we need to reference taxonomies. And here you can pass the built-in ones or any custom ones that you create. So here we could reference post tag. And if I reload, now we have that. And the same thing if you want to have categories as well, you would reference category. And notice that these are singular. A taxonomy name will always be singular and lowercase. And of course, it can't have spaces. Reload, and okay, good. There's our categories and our tags. And you can move those around however you wish. Now, in our case, I'm not going to keep a category. We're just going to tag it like so. So this looks good. Everything seems to be working fine. But as soon as I want to add another post type, I'd have to copy all of this, paste it in, and then I'm duplicating all of this code, and I don't like doing that. So why don't we try to clean this up and turn it into a function? Now, you could use an object-oriented approach, and that's what I personally use, but for now, let's just focus on the concepts itself, and then you can expand it once you understand what everything does. If we add too much abstraction in with a class, I think that'll be too difficult to follow. So we'll create a function called add post type, and this post type needs to accept the name, which will in our case be snippet. And the second parameter is going to be a list of arguments, which is essentially this right here. So within this function, let's just copy all of this in like so. Now we can call add post type, and let's pass in our parameters. So we want to create a post type called snippet, and the list of arguments will be an array. And now what I want to do here is, ideally, for ease of use, I should be able to do this and it will just work. So let's see how we can do that first. If I reload, we can see missing argument 2 for post type, and that's because I am accepting a parameter here, but I want it to be optional. So let's set it by default to an empty array. Next, let's replace some of these parameters. So if I create a snippet called hello, that should be represented within here. And right now we're still hard coding it. And here we're going to come to our first issue that a lot of beginning developers face, is if we were to echo out name right here, if I reload, you'll see it does say snippet, good. But watch what happens if I echo it out from within the callback of our init action. And notice we're not getting anything at all, undefined variable name. And that's because we're in a different scope. So WordPress is executing a function called doAction, but it is not passing name to it. So even though we can access name as a local variable within the confines of this function, within here, we're in a different scope essentially. So how can we fix this? There's a couple ways. And one of them would be, and I don't suggest you do this, but it would be to declare it global. So I could say post type name is a global variable, and then I could say post type name equals name. So here we've assigned snippet to that value, and then within add action, we still can't do this, echo post type name, but we can do it if we bring it in. So I want to say, I want you to grab that post type global variable. And now if I reload, you can see it is displaying right there. But this is still a bad practice. We don't want to have all these global variables. Another method, and there's around 3 different ones, if we are going to be using PHP 5.3, which we are in this case, we can use this use feature right here. And I know that looks a little odd, function, then use, and we can declare that this callback function should use any specific parameters. So if I want to say, I want you to use name and args, we're going to take these values and we're going to pass them into this callback function. And now if I echo name, and if I reload, you can see we are displaying it. So that's a nice way. Just remember, I believe that is limited to PHP 5.3. Okay, so now within here, let's replace some values. Name, and right here will be add new name. However, if I want to embed this variable, I need to make sure I use double quotes. And we'll set supports, all of those will be the defaults. We won't set a default taxonomy though. So now if I reload, we are getting snippet, and we can change this. So if I had a new post type called thing, and I reload, that's working well. So now we have a lot of flexibility because we can then reference this function from our functions file, and we don't have to deal with all of the code itself. A couple issues though. One of them is, first, it's lowercase, and that's how it should be, but we want the label to be uppercase, and generally it'll be plural. So if I open up posts, you can see all posts, but here we just have thing. So why don't we change this, and we'll change it to all, and if I reload, now it's just all thing, and we want that to be plural. We could have an option where you can pass it in, or we can be super lazy and append an S on. And of course, that's not going to work in a lot of cases, but for our little demo here, I think it's fine. All right, so now it's just all things, but I do want things to be capital. So that'll be my last step, is pass this right here to UC words, or we can pass the variable alone. It doesn't really matter. But if I reload, now we have things. So if I change this to snippet like we want, and I reload, there we are, and we have a lot of flexibility now. All snippets, if we add a new one, add new snippet, that is lowercase. So if you really wanted to be specific here, you could create a variable called upper, and that could be UC words name, and then you could reference it that way. And the advantage to this is you're not calling UC words over and over and over. Now if I reload, we're getting the same effect there. It's up to you. The last thing is, I do want to make sure that when we register a post type, that we overwrite this value here. We're still hard coding it. So we can do name, but again, what if the user passes something like snippet, hello, hello, something with uppercase letters and with spaces? If we reload, we can see invalid post type. So we want to fix this for the user. So why don't we do this right here? And we can say post type, and that's going to be, the first thing is I want to replace any spaces with underlines. And we can do string replace for that. It's very simple. And it accepts 3 parameters. First one is, what are we looking for? We're looking for space. Second is, what are we replacing it with? An underscore. And the third is, what are we working with? Name. And now another option is to, rather than creating a new variable, overwrite the value of name entirely. Now the next step is we've, in this case, changed it to this, but we still have those capitals. So let's also pass that to string to lower to make sure that we make it all lowercase. So now let's try it out again. And if we did everything correctly, this should be fine. And there we are. Now you can see it is a valid post type. It doesn't look good. No one would ever do that, but it's good to provide some error checking. So bring that back to snippet, and we're ready to move on to the next level. So we've added a new snippet. The next step is we want to be able to override the default supports features here. So ideally what I want to do is pass an array, and this will override any of the defaults. So I could then say supports, and we only want to support a title just for now. But if I reload, that's not going to show up. So what we want to do is be able to say, take this array and this default array and merge them, and take whatever I pass and make that override. And we can do that in PHP by using array merge. Now, array merge will accept two parameters. The first one is, what is our first array? And our first array is going to be this one right here. So I'm going to cut that out and paste it in. The second parameter is going to be the array to merge with this one. And that's going to be represented. We've created an array, we've passed it to this function. It's now stored within args. We pass args into this callback function. So we'll do it right here, args. So now, by default, with array merge, the second array passed will override anything contained here. Okay, so now we have merged those arrays, but we haven't done anything with it, so it'll just vanish. I want to store the result of it in args, and we're going to overwrite that value. Now, when we register post type, we reference args. And if we did everything correctly, whatever we pass, if anything, will override this array. Let's see, refresh. And there we are, and there's our title. A lot more flexibility. I like this a lot. Okay, so now we're essentially done. Let's add our supports, and we're going to support a title, an editor, comments, and we'll also support a taxonomy of post tag, like so. There we are, that's good. The next step is, how would we want to filter our snippets? If you were browsing a website that had snippets, how would you want to filter it? And that will help you decide what taxonomies to create. So my instinct is, let's come back, I would like to filter according to maybe difficulty. I don't want to look at snippets if they're way over my head. Maybe language, maybe framework, things like this. So we're not going to do all of them. We'll do maybe these two right here, difficulty and language. So we can register a taxonomy by using the function register taxonomy, and we pass three parameters: the name of the taxonomy, the post type that it refers to, and again, an array that specifies the options. So let's add these now. The name of our taxonomy is going to be language. The post type is going to be what it refers to, snippet. This taxonomy is connected to the snippet post type. And then finally, the third parameter would be a list of options. I'm going to leave that off for now, and once again with register taxonomy, we only want to do that at the init level. So you could either add your init action and then call add post type and register taxonomy, or you can just repeat it within your functions. It really just depends. Once again, let's create a function called add taxonomy, and that way we can reference it below, and we reference the name, so it would be language, and the post type it references. So let's take all of this and bring it into our new function. And now let's make these variables. So we'll have name and post type and switch these out as well. Next, let's make sure we put this within the init action again. There we are. And because we are doing this callback technique again, let's make sure that we use name and post type. Now we also, again, want to provide the ability to pass an array of options. So we'll say args, and we're going to set that by default to an empty array because it's not required. And I'll make sure I pass that to our callback function as well. Now, if we come back and we reload the page, you can see we do have this new taxonomy, but strangely, it says post tags. Why is it repeating that name? And that's because if you do not specify a name or a label for your taxonomy, it's going to use the default taxonomy name, which is post tags. So why don't we make that a default? Here, we'll pass an array, and the label will be equal to whatever the name was that we passed. In this case, language. Now if I reload, you can see that that has been updated to language. So once again, we have that issue where it's lowercase, and we don't want to have to deal with that. But again, we have that issue where it is lowercase. So why don't we fix that right now? And this time we'll just say string to lower name. That way we can be sure that when we register a taxonomy, that is lowercase and that is required for register taxonomy as well. And then for label, we can do UC words for now, or we can do what we did before by creating an upper variable. It just depends. There we are. There's our language. So what's really nice, again, is because we have these functions abstracted away, we can now just use something as simple as this. So that's our next step is I'm going to take these 2 lines here and we're going to bring them into our functions file like so. And that way we can really see the benefits of creating a specialized class, or in this case, a procedural list of functions. So now we've added a taxonomy of language. Let's do the other one we talked about, and this would be difficulty. And then we'll also have the tagging, the built-in tagging taxonomy as well, and that'll give us a lot of flexibility. So now we have language and difficulty. When you click on Add New, that will then add these options to the sidebar. We have tags, language, and difficulty. Now another option is, what if you want to make it create a hierarchy? So what if for language, you want to give the ability to specify maybe PHP, but then you could have a subcategory that would be CodeIgniter. Well, in that case, you need to specify that within the array that you pass. So here we could say array, and if you ever want to know all of the list of options, simply refer to the function in the WordPress codex. So you would refer to register post type or register taxonomy, and in their codex, they have a huge list of options. In our case, we want hierarchical, if I can pronounce that correctly. I think that's right. And we're going to set that to true. By default, it's false. And now that we've added that, we want to make sure that, like register post type, we merge in our array arguments. So let's do that now. Take this back out, and we'll say args equals array merge with the ones that are passed in. And then we'll register post type args. Now let's reload the page, and now that we've declared that this one should have a hierarchy, you can see it displays a little differently, and that way within language we could specify a subcategory if we wanted. Now in this case we don't really need that, but we always want to add that option for future use. In this case, I'm going to leave it to the defaults like so. The next step is, now that we've created our taxonomies, what other, maybe more specific information would we want to attach to a post? And traditionally, you use custom fields for that. So let's think, what would not be a taxonomy? For example, the language taxonomy is one that would apply to mini posts. Mini posts will be a CSS or PHP or .NET. But this post specifically would have maybe a GitHub link, maybe a website URL that is connected to this site, things like that, things that are unique to the post. And that's where you would use meta boxes. So let's do that now. Let's return to our mycustompost.php file. And we can do that by using the function add meta box. And this accepts a handful of parameters, and that's why I create a snippet to remind myself, because if you're like me, I can never remember all of them. Again, we can't just put add meta box right here in this file. We need to use a specific action. Now, if you're using WordPress 2.9 or lower, meaning anything less than 3.0, you would use the admin init action. Now, if you're using 3.0 or higher, it's much smarter to use an action called add meta boxes, and that's easy to remember. That way, this will only fire at that specific point in the WordPress lifecycle. All right, so now let's give these an ID. And we're going to hard code this in for the time being. And I'm going to use my initials because you always want everything to be unique. And using your initials is a good way to make sure that happens. So we'll say snippet info. This will be a box where we can provide additional information about the snippet. Here, what is the title? What is the heading that will be for the box? Snippet info. Next is callback, and this is a function that will run that is responsible for displaying the necessary fields, for displaying the label and the inputs. You can either use an anonymous function here, but I find that's a little muddy within all of these parameters. It gets confusing. So in this case, I do like to reference a named function, and we'll call it JW snippet info CB. Notice that this is similar to the ID, and you want to follow whatever yours might be, a convention, and you do it for all of them, so you're not always trying to remember how you named things. In this case, I use my initials, followed by the ID, followed by CB for callback. The next type is, what post type is this meta box attached to? And remember, you have to specify this, because otherwise, how would WordPress know where this would display? It could display on a post or within a page. We want it only for the snippet post type. The context is, where will it display within this area? Will it be in the side? Will it be in the main section? In this case, we're going to set it to normal. And then finally, the priority level is vertically. How important is it? If you set a high priority level, it'll show as close to the top of the page as possible. And if you set it to low, vice versa. So here, why don't we say high? If you leave that blank, it'll be set to a default of default.